For more on this, I'm joined by Mary McCord. She served as acting assistant attorney general for national security at the DOJ and is now an MS Now legal analyst. Also joining me right here on set, George Conway, an attorney, founder of the Society of the Rule of Law. He helped co-found the Lincoln Project. He's currently a Democratic candidate in the congressional race for New York's 12th district. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for being with us. I appreciate your time. Mary, let me just start with you. I think there's an important distinction people may be losing. Pam Bondi wasn't actually let go for some performance reason associated with being attorney general. It wasn't that she was failing at her job as attorney general. She just wasn't doing something enough. And that enough is not actually normally a job requirement of being the attorney general.
Well, to the extent that this firing was because she wasn't able to deliver on the political retribution prosecutions that Donald Trump desires, that's much less a function of her and a function of a couple of things. One, you need evidence. You need facts that actually support a violation of law. And you've got to be able to show that to a grand jury to get an indictment. And we've seen that grand juries have repeatedly refused to indict, or even in the case of Lindsay Halligan and James Comey, when Letitia James and James Comey, when Lindsay Halligan was able to go into a grand jury and get an indictment, a judge has already sort of questioned her presentation and whether she left out key facts or maybe said things improper. And of course, a judge also dismissed those cases because she was improperly appointed. When others tried to then re-indict Tish James, it failed. So you need evidence, you need facts, and you need those to show there's a violation of law. And that's not going to change because somebody else is then in the position of the attorney general. It's also not the attorney general who goes into court and presents those cases. And so, I think this problem is one that if Donald Trump thinks he can fix it by putting a different position in that chair, he's wrong about that.
George, give me your take on this, because Mary makes a good point. You need evidence. They keep trying. Donald Trump is obsessed with going after these people he perceives as his enemies, most of whom are just doing their job, right? James Comey, Tish James.
There is a line that runs through the history of the United States of America. It is a line that marks a before and an after. That line is the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. It transformed this nation. It expanded the promise of democracy to every person born on this soil. Today, that promise is under a coordinated and sustained assault. The Trump administration is currently urging the Supreme Court to roll back that promise. They are raising fundamental questions about who belongs in this country. They are pushing legal theories that would be disastrous for our national identity. We are watching an attempt to drag this nation back to a period where we were less free. This is the case against an administration that believes the law is whatever they say it is. Let's play this clip.
They were doing what they were doing. We're not looking at candidates. I mean, Jeanine Pirro at least has some experience as a prosecutor. That's it. Yeah. We're not looking at people who are otherwise better qualified to do their jobs. I'm not giving Pam Bondi more credit than she's due, but she was a lawyer and a prosecutor.
Right. And look, I mean, there are a bunch of problems going on here for people who want to work for the Trump administration. First of all, it's very, very difficult for starters to be evil enough and depraved enough and corrupt enough and grifting enough for Donald Trump. But here, the secondary problem was exactly what Mary pointed out, which is you actually need evidence. You can't just make these cases up. Right. I mean, you can't just fabricate evidence. I mean, maybe that's their next step. They'll try to do that. You just can't make cases up. You have to go into a court. You have to prove them. And not that even, these people were not all that competent, the Lindsay Halligans of the world. And Aunt Pam Bondi was actually a prosecutor, as you said. But no amount of competence combined with sufficient depravity can bring these prosecutions. They just don't work. But Donald Trump doesn't care about that because he's detached from reality. He's deranged. He's a narcissistic sociopath. And now we have a third thing going on, which is he's failing. Okay? He's floundering. He's screwed up this war. He's screwed up the economy. His poll numbers are dropping, down to the low 30s, which
kind of where it gets stuck.
Which where it gets stuck. It's hard to see him go any lower, but,
right.
I give him a chance. And so, as a narcissist, as a pathological narcissist, he can't take the blame. So he wants to start chopping away at the people around him. And of course, he starts with the women because he's a misogynist and unceremoniously gets rid of them. But, there are plenty of corrupt male incompetence and he's going to get around to them. So which raises the question. Who would take these freaking jobs?
Right.
Why do people take these jobs? Why would you want to go? And Pam Bondi actually had a decent, okay reputation. She was a real prosecutor and a real DA. I don't think she was a rocket scientist, but she was respected in her own way. And now she's basically going to be remembered forever as being the worst attorney general in history who destroyed, literally has gutted the Department of Justice. It's going to take years to fix.
They've literally lost lawyers. They've lost prosecutors.
Donald Trump claims that he can undo centuries of progress just with a stroke of his pen. That is a lie. It is a lie rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of the United States Constitution. It is a lie designed to convince the American people that the President of the United States is a king. It is a lie intended to bypass the co-equal branches of government and the bedrock principles of our democracy. This administration is making a series of claims that have no basis in law. They claim the federal government cannot fund Medicare or child care because we are fighting wars. That is a lie. They claim that federal judges who check executive power are rogue activists. That is a lie. They claim they are conducting a reset on mass deportation to manage optics while they actually expand enforcement in the shadows. That is a lie. We must hold these claims to the light of the facts. Let's play this clip.
Going to take the job. Mary, let me ask you this, though, because I apologize in advance because it is such a waste of your time and your expertise, given your experience. But to the extent that you need evidence and that this administration has tried and failed numerous times to gain evidence in some of these prosecutions, how much of this is the process being the point? Does Donald Trump just want somebody who's going to be more of a bulldog, who scares more people? Because I don't know how this ends. I don't know why this is good for Donald Trump. To George's point, he's losing on the economy. He's losing on this war. He's losing popularity. What does going after Comey and Schiff and Tish James and all of these people actually do for him at this point?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, because even if it were somehow successful and could get through a grand jury, it's probably never going to get through an actual jury trial. And like I said, you're going to have to come up with some evidence, and that's not going to change if it's Todd Blanche, who's now the acting AG. It's not going to change if it's Lee Zeldin or Jeanine Pirro. And, one of the things that, I think George is right that Donald Trump started with the women because he's a misogynist. Yep. But I also wonder sometimes if the way that Pam Bondi just supplicated herself to him almost was an embarrassment. Todd Blanche has a different style. Todd Blanche doesn't sit out there and preach every day that Donald Trump is the greatest president we've ever had in the history of America, the way Pam Bondi does. She's done it on Capitol Hill. She's done it in public speaking. Todd Blanche is just like the bulldog who just rams Trump's agenda. And I think part of it could be to George's misogynist points. And now I'm way outside of my lane as a lawyer and a former DOJ. I'm now doing, psychology, which is not my expertise. But, when I watch her, I wonder if sometimes that just didn't bother him. He wanted somebody who was just going to be a little bit more forceful. And even though he loves people to supplicate themselves to him, I think maybe it was somewhat off-putting, and maybe he thought that was part of the problem.
It's weird because, again, George, while everybody
the central lie of this administration is the assertion of unilateral power. Donald Trump explicitly stated that he can undo centuries of progress just with a stroke of my pen. This is his official position in arguing against birthright citizenship before the Supreme Court. He is joined in this by linked authorities throughout his administration. They are pushing legal theories that birthright citizenship, clearly established by the 14th Amendment, can be discarded by executive order. Another primary lie is the claim of financial insolvency for domestic priorities. The president said the federal government cannot provide Medicare and child care because we're fighting wars. This claim was made to justify the prioritizing of bombs over families. Further, the administration has labeled federal judges from New Jersey to California as rogue judges. They call the rule of law judicial activism whenever a court requires the executive branch to adhere to the law. Let's play this clip.
Remembers the files are on my desk just waiting to be reviewed. I remember the testimony in which she was asked about prosecuting Epstein collaborators, and she talked about the Dow.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that was sort of stupid.
It was stupid, but I have an answer to, I'm happy to go into the psychological stuff with Donald Trump, as you know. I'll answer the question that Mary said. What does it do for him?
Yeah.
it gives him personal satisfaction
Right.
to hurt his enemies. He will destroy himself if he can hurt them.
Right.
Which is the big danger for our country. This is what
Which is wild, because I think of him as a self-preservationist, but this doesn't look like self-preservation.
He'll take everyone, he
He's gonna
wants
go down
to
with the ship.
Correct. I mean, it's kind of like what happened in January 6th that even Mitch McConnell recognizes. He wanted to burn everything on the way out of town.
Yeah.
And that's the danger with a sick, deranged, malignant narcissist like a Donald Trump is they end up destroying not just themselves, but everyone around them. And the real question is whether Republicans are going to finally realize we have to get rid of him too.
Right.
And we have to help the Democrats get rid of him before he destroys us all.
Thanks to both of you. I appreciate you kicking us off this morning. Mary McCord is an MS Now legal analyst and professor at Georgetown Law. George Conway, founder of the Society of the Rule of Law and a Democratic candidate.
The forensic evidence against these lies is found in the text of the Constitution and the actions of the administration itself. The 14th Amendment states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. This is a clear constitutional mandate. It is not an executive privilege. Professor Kermit Roosevelt III of the University of Pennsylvania Law School notes that these legal theories are disastrous for our national identity. The evidence proves the administration is not merely interpreting law, but attempting to rewrite it. Regarding the claim that the government cannot fund health care, the Pentagon is currently requesting $200 billion for the war in Iran. Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times notes this $200 billion is really just a down payment. This proves the government has vast resources but chooses to allocate them toward destruction rather than child care or Medicare. The evidence shows that oil prices are spiking because of this U.S.-led war. This creates an overall inflationary effect that costs every American more at the pump and in the grocery store. The evidence concerning the Department of Justice proves a pattern of political corruption. Pam Bondi was recently removed as Attorney General. The evidence shows she was not let go for performance reasons. She was fired because she failed to deliver on the political retribution prosecutions that Donald Trump desires. Mary McCord, a former acting assistant attorney general, explains that prosecutions require real evidence and grand juries that won't deliver politically driven indictments. Grand juries have repeatedly refused to indict the president's perceived enemies. This proves that the administration's legal defeats are not the result of rogue judges, but of a total lack of factual evidence. Additionally, the Wall Street Journal reports on an antitrust scandal within the Department of Justice. Mike Davis, a lobbyist with links to the president, reportedly wields extraordinary influence over major corporate deals. He uses bare-knuckle tactics and threats to bypass regulators. This proves that while the president claims to be fighting a deep state, his own administration is operating a shadow system of corporate favors. In Minnesota, ICE agents have killed American citizens like Alex Priddy and Renee Good. Frame-by-frame video analysis proves that Alex Priddy was in no way presenting a threat to officers when he was killed. This contradicts the government's narrative and proves a culture of impunity within federal law enforcement. Each piece of evidence reveals a strategy of absolute control. The attack on birthright citizenship is an attempt to create tiers of citizens. It is an effort to decide who belongs based on political ideology rather than constitutional right. By claiming the president can undo progress with a pen, the administration is asserting that the executive is the sole source of law. This is the definition of autocracy. The decision to fund war over health care is a control tactic. It keeps the population in a state of economic anxiety while projecting power abroad. Escalating threats against Iran are being improvised. Representative Adam Smith notes that the president thinks the only reason to avoid military action is a lack of guts. This macho posturing is a way to maintain control over the domestic political narrative. It shifts focus away from the housing crisis and the billionaire crisis at home. The firing of Pam Bondi shows that even blind fealty is not enough. The president demands the power to use the Department of Justice as a weapon for personal revenge. This is an attempt to control the legal system itself. When grand juries refuse to indict, the administration attacks the system. The use of administrative subpoenas by the Department of Homeland Security allows the government to obtain data without a judge's order. This is a secretive legal weapon used to minimize public dissent. It is a direct effort to control the private information of American citizens. In Ohio, a proposed bill would track all pregnancies. This is an attempt to exercise state control over the most private aspects of human life. It mirrors the authoritarian themes found in historical and fictional warnings of state overreach. The strongest defense argument from the Trump administration is the theory of the unitary executive. They argue that the president has total authority over the executive branch and that any check by a judge or a prosecutor is an infringement on the mandate given by the voters. They claim that rogue judges are interfering with the will of the people. We dismantle this argument using the law and the provided sources. Former U.S. Court of Appeals Judge J. Michael Luttig calls this a war on the rule of law. He states that the president's disrespect for the Constitution is frightening. The law does not allow for a unitary executive that is above the judicial branch. When courts check executive power, that is not activism, it is constitutional accountability. The administration's defense also fails because it ignores the requirement of evidence. George Conway notes that you cannot just make cases up. No amount of competence or depravity can bring a successful prosecution if there is no evidence of a crime. The defense that the president is being treated unfairly is dismantled by the fact that grand juries, made up of ordinary citizens, are the ones refusing to indict. The administration's failure to secure indictments is a failure of facts, not a conspiracy of the deep state. Furthermore, the defense that the government is broke is dismantled by the request for $200 billion for a war of choice. The money exists. The choice to spend it on bombs instead of children is a policy decision, not a financial necessity. The 14th Amendment was ratified to ensure that the rights of citizenship could never again be taken away by the whims of a state or a leader. It established that birth on U.S. soil is the definitive qualification for citizenship. This is known as jus soli, or the right of the soil. This constitutional provision cannot be changed by an executive order. It cannot be undone with a stroke of a pen. To change the 14th Amendment would require a constitutional amendment, which involves 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the states. The legal system also relies on the separation of powers. The executive branch enforces the law. The legislative branch makes the law. The judicial branch interprets the law. When a federal judge issues an order, the executive branch is legally bound to follow it. Labeling a judge rogue for enforcing the law is a rejection of the entire constitutional structure. In terms of criminal law, an indictment requires a grand jury to find probable cause that a crime was committed. A grand jury is a check on the power of the government. If a prosecutor cannot convince a grand jury that there is evidence of a crime, the case cannot move forward. This is why the president's desire for political retribution prosecutions is failing. The law requires facts. It requires evidence. It does not operate on the nonsensical grievances of a politician. The professional judgment on this administration's fitness is clear. They are demonstrating a profound disdain for the constitutional limits of their office. They are prioritizing personal vendettas over the needs of the American people. They are improvising a war that has spiked oil prices and threatened global stability. They are targeting American dissent with DNA collection and secretive subpoenas. This is an administration that is speed-running Watergate in a much dumber way, according to Matt Stoller of the American Economic Liberties Project. The focus on self-naming government buildings and using the Department of Justice for retribution is the behavior of an autocrat, not a democratic leader. The failure to understand the basic functioning of Medicare and the 14th Amendment shows a lack of basic comprehension required for the presidency. They are engaging in collective punishment in Lebanon and a crippling oil blockade in Cuba that teeters on the brink of a humanitarian crisis. This is a failure of leadership and a betrayal of the national interest. The following experts provide the authoritative basis for these conclusions. Kermit Roosevelt III, professor of law at the University of Pennsylvania, confirms the administration's birthright citizenship theories are disastrous. Mary McCord, former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the DOJ and current MS Now legal analyst, details the failure of the administration to provide evidence for its desired prosecutions. J. Michael Luttig, former U.S. Court of Appeals judge, identifies the president's actions as a war on the rule of law. Nancy Gertner, former federal judge, states that the president is the rogue actor, not the judges standing up to him. Representative Adam Smith, a top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, confirms the president is improvising the war against Iran. Dr. Nahid Bhadelia, an infectious diseases physician, notes that the administration has undermined mRNA technology and discouraging life-saving innovation. Urban economist Jenny Schutz explains that the housing crisis requires local reforms, not the federal talking points being used to distract the public. Our institutions are currently being tested by this administration's brazenness. The Department of Justice has been gutted. It has lost experienced lawyers and prosecutors who refuse to participate in corrupt practices. Institutional accountability is now resting largely with the courts and with state authorities. Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner has vowed to prosecute federal agents if they break local laws. He notes that local prosecutors have a superpower that federal prosecutors do not. The president is unable to pardon anyone with a state court conviction. This is a critical check on federal overreach. State attorneys general are also stepping in to investigate the antitrust scandal involving Mike Davis. They are forcing corporate officials into depositions that could uncover Watergate-level corruption. The institutions of democracy are reasserting themselves. The firing of Kristi Noem and Pam Bondi shows that public pressure and bipartisan pushback are starting to crack the president's veneer of impunity. Record voter turnouts and mass protests like the No Kings rallies are shaping how institutions behave. Lawmakers and judges are getting the message that a democracy means the people rule. The procedural consequences of these actions will be felt in the courts for years. The Supreme Court is now forced to hear a case on birthright citizenship that could fundamentally redefine American identity. If the administration's legal theories are accepted, it will set a precedent that any constitutional right can be erased by executive whim. At the Department of Justice, the loss of staff means that legitimate investigations into crime and corruption will be delayed or abandoned. The use of AI to disenfranchise Medicare recipients will lead to a wave of litigation over denials of care. The ICE practice of collecting DNA from detained protesters will face Fourth Amendment challenges regarding unreasonable searches and seizures. The U.S.-led war in Iran will continue to have knock-on inflationary consequences. We should expect long-term spiked oil prices and economic instability. The failure to negotiate a ceasefire will result in more downed airmen and more fruitless spending on bombs. These are the procedural realities of an administration that improvises its foreign policy and ignores the law at home. The No Kings movement organizers expect their biggest turnout yet. This public dissent is a procedural signal to lawmakers that the current path is unsustainable. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You must stay informed and support the institutions that hold power to account. Contact your representatives and demand transparency in the DOJ antitrust investigations. Support local efforts to protect your neighbors from federal overreach. The rule of law depends on your participation.